looked on this woman and had compassion on her. Okay, that's what the text says in Luke chapter 7 and verse 13. If you want to take your Bibles there, we'll look at a couple of those verses. So if you want to go to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, Jesus raises this widow's son. Now, I want you to think about the condition of a widow in the first century. Wouldn't have really been like the condition of a widow today. In that time, when her husband died, unless she had children to care for her, she had no one that could provide for her. Her condition would have been much more severe than like today would have been. But she did have a son when her husband died. The unfortunate thing is that when Jesus meets her in Luke chapter 7, her son has now died, which not only leaves her without a husband to care for her, but now any son that can provide for her as well. Her future probably looked like it had very little hope in it. And Jesus meets her in Luke chapter 7, and they're at the gate of the city. And in verse 13, the Lord saw her and had compassion on her and said, "Do not weep." Okay, now I have always been drawn to the fact that this miracle was kind of performed based on an evaluation of what Jesus saw. We always talk about miracles being performed for a purpose, but the text really indicates that Jesus saw her and had compassion on her. Now, that's not to say that the miracle doesn't ultimately accomplish the purpose every other miracle does. You see that in verse 17, that down there, when everybody began to hear about that, his news of Jesus spread throughout Judea and the whole area. That was the purpose of miracles Jesus was proving. But I have some actual personal ideas as to why Jesus had compassion on the widow's son, or on the widow who lost her son in Luke chapter 7. Now, the Bible says Jesus had compassion on her. I believe there's kind of a deeper connection to this. If you'll remember when we were studying the life of Christ in our Jesus the Christ series in this curriculum, we talked about how Jesus on the cross said to the Apostle John that he was essentially committing the care of his mother to John, which is kind of odd to me. First of all, because Mary, we know, was married to a man named Joseph. And second of all, we also know Jesus had other brothers. It makes me think that on the cross, and we brought this out when we studied that Jesus' father, Joseph, probably died before he was in ministry, or maybe while he was in ministry. I mean, why else would he commit the care of his mother to somebody besides his father or his other family? So I think maybe Jesus could have had compassion on this woman because he saw her as someone who would represent his mother Mary eventually. Now, that's just conjecture on my point. But think about it. If Jesus committed the care of his mother to John, and then Jesus himself died on the cross, that's a pretty close resemblance to what Mary would have to experience, the death of a husband and the death of a son. So maybe that's the reason he had compassion on her. I don't know. I do know that Jesus was a compassionate man, that he opened up his heart to people. In fact, James chapter 5 and verse 11, that third point on your PowerPoint there, tells us that the Lord is the Lord of compassion and mercy. So when God sees us weep, his heart breaks in compassion for us, which I hope brings us some level of comfort, right? That God understands our struggles and our frustrations. The Lord is very compassionate. But regardless of any of those other outside details, the fact still remains that Jesus raised somebody from the dead, which I can remember. I've probably shared with this before with y'all about a guy that I met on Facebook who told me that he could raise people from the dead. And we actually, I sent him a message and I was like, this person I know died. I want you to raise them from the dead. And of course, it never happened, right? But when people make the claim about something like that, it's pretty serious, right? And Jesus performed this miracle here in Luke chapter 7. A very extreme miracle. As they were, if you read the text in John chapter 7, it wasn't like this woman's son had died and he met her and she was telling him about how her son had died. They were like in the funeral procession when this happened. The pallbearers were carrying what I could guess is the equivalent of a casket. But it was open-ended, it seems, or at least the top was open, or there was no top, because Jesus touched the dead man and told him to sit up in the midst of a funeral procession. Pretty extreme. Now, of course, the miracle served the same purpose. Verse 17 says that the report about Jesus spread through the whole of Judea and the surrounding country. So, of course, the miracle did what the miracle was supposed to do. But you still have this very special connection of Jesus to this woman in Luke chapter 7. So you've got the raising of the widow's son in Nain, this amazing miracle that's going to be followed with another miracle on card 17. Before we move on, anybody got any comments or questions or concerns about card 16, the raising of the widow's son?
Could you imagine the people that was carrying the coffin?
I could not. I mean, I tell you what,
Set up and be alive.
yeah, for your mind to be set on what's going on at the moment and for that to suddenly change, I mean, it's something. It's miraculous. Again, I don't think any miracle is more miraculous than any other miracle, right? But you want to talk about the most miraculous miracle. If you could make an argument, this seems to be it. Raising somebody from the dead. We're going to read another miracle here in just a moment. The same thing happening in John chapter 11. Okay? Any other comments about that? Okay. Miracle number 2 is card number 17. I don't know why the numbers are doing that. I apologize. Card number 17. Where were the demons cast into the pigs or the swine? Gadara, or we often call this guy the Gadarean demoniac. My dad used to preach a sermon, the Gadarean demoniac, and I thought, what is he talking about? I understand now, right? This is a man from Gadara. Okay, this is the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. So we're just on the western side talking about Nain. Now we flip to the other side on the eastern side talking about the area of Gadara, which is kind of a broad spectrum area. It would be like instead of saying we went to Bowdon to say we went to Carroll County or we went to West Georgia, right? It's a bigger area, okay? It spans that whole east side of the Sea of Galilee. Okay. Now, in some passages of text in the Bible, they talk about 2 demon-possessed men. In other passages, they hyper-focus in on just one of them, the most notorious of all of them. What happens is Jesus comes and they come up on the shore and Jesus steps out of the boat and this man that's possessed with, as he claims, many demons. You remember he asked what his name was and he said, my name is Legion. Our name is Legion, for we are many. Okay, so you've got a lot of demons that's possessing this guy. And you read a lot of the details about him. Some of the texts talk about a man that was naked, that cut himself, he couldn't be chained, he couldn't be held by chains. Last night we went to the fair over in Carrollton. We watched a lady that dropped down into one of those big, buckets of water, the big coffins of water, and she was chained up. She got a bobby pin and, acting like she can't breathe, which of course, she'd done it 3,000 times, they said. So she knew what she was doing. But she was picking the locks on her chains and picking the lock up here and jumped out. She had to pick the locks. You couldn't imagine somebody that could rip through chains. Okay, this is the supernatural power of demons that when they're in somebody, this happens. Now, I would point out here about these demons that they were subject to Jesus. You see that in the text here of our passage. That Jesus, it wasn't like a question of, is Jesus going to cast us out? It's basically like, when Jesus casts us out, where are we going to go? Well, Jesus, please just send us into this herd of pigs over here. Luke chapter 8, verses 28 through 33. So they are subject to Jesus. Demons had to obey him. They had no choice but to obey Jesus. I remember reading an illustration about John S. Sweeney, who was debating another preacher on the mode of baptism and whether or not, the New Testament teaches that somebody has to be baptized in order to be saved or they just have to be sprinkled. The illustration goes this way, that the denominational preacher took the extreme position that there were no examples of immersion in the New Testament at all. Okay? And so in an attempt at humor, he said, well, yes, there's one case of immersion in the New Testament referencing the story of the pigs that went into the sea and drowned. To which John Sweeney replied, he said, yeah, that's one case of immersion, but because the devil lost his bacon in the deal, he's been trying to change the mode ever since. So, that's kind of some jest they had about this debate over immersion being the means by which you and I are saved in baptism. But, you do see this very dramatic sense in which the demons are casting these pigs. And, the text says there were 2,000 of them. I don't know if you've ever heard 1 or 2 pigs. To imagine 2,000 of them going out into the water and drowning, the racket and the amount of dramatics that would take place in that event would be outrageous. And then think 2,000, pig corpses floating in the water. It's very dramatic. We kind of read these stories and we think, oh, yeah, he cast them into pigs. This would have been a serious ordeal. Not to mention that somebody just lost 2,000 pigs. Let's not forget that this probably was somebody's livelihood and business. And so, nonetheless, Jesus does this really extreme miracle. Okay. Now, when people heard what Jesus did in the area, do you remember what they asked him to do? He said, "Get out of here. We don't want you anywhere near here anymore," which, makes sense. If somebody lost 2,000 pigs, they would probably want him out of there pretty soon. After Jesus began to leave, the demon-possessed man who was now healed begged Jesus to leave with him so that he could have a fresh start, but Jesus denied him. Okay? And in the text, Mark's account of it, Mark chapter 5, the Lord said that he should go and tell his friends all that the Lord has done. Again, here's the purpose of the miracle. Go tell your friends what Jesus has done for you. And the word of Jesus, of his reputation, spreads. All right, any comments about the pigs, the herd of swine that had the demons cast in them?
Where did the demons go after that?
No clue. You know?
No, I don't know either.
I don't know.
I would ask if I knew.
Yeah.
I doubt that he would ask.
Yeah. Jesus had a knack of doing that. He asked questions he already knew the answer to. They went into the deep. Maybe so.
They call the sea part of the time a sea and part of the time a lake.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fresh water?
I would assume the Sea of Galilee is fresh water. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure.
More like a lake.
A lake. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, most places, like when we went there, I actually was looking through pictures the other day and found some when we were there on the boat. I should have put them in the slideshow, but most times, like, you can see across it. Like, you see the other side. I don't know, Morgan grew up in Fairhope, so if you've ever been down to Fairhope or Mobile, you can go to the bay, and you can look across the bay, and you can see Mobile, like, off in the distance. That's kind of how it is, right? Maybe 5, 6, 8 miles across. Not too far. Far enough to see. I think the widest is 8 miles of the Sea of Galilee. Or the lake, it's sometimes called the Lake of Gennesaret, right? So,
Like my translation has it as there's 2 different names
yeah.
for the city, so I didn't know if that was.
Yeah, it goes by 2 different names. You'll see that in different maps. It's all the same body of water.
It's one of those
Lowest freshwater lake. How about that? So that would make sense because, that area is like close to sea level, and then you make your way up. That's why they always said they were going up to Jerusalem. Makes sense. I think I actually read somewhere that's the reason why they had such bad storms. I showed you the video of Sunday. Okay, we only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to quickly breeze over card number 18, where Peter confessed Jesus. That was at Caesarea Philippi. You look at a map. Caesarea Philippi is like north of the Sea of Galilee. So we've kind of hit like all the different corners in this particular set of cards. Caesarea Philippi is way up north, and basically, just to summarize it, that's where Jesus said, "Who do men say that I am?" Some say you're John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets. But who do you say that I am? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's where that confession took place, on the northern end of the Sea of Galilee at the area of Caesarea Philippi. All right, card number 19. Let's go to this one. This is the one I really wanted to finish on, and we'll try to get to card number 20. Let me make sure I got my time right. I don't know, I misplace everything. Have y'all noticed that? Yeah, 5 till. Okay, good deal. I told somebody the other day, those little things you can clip on your belt that got the zips on it, that you put your ID. I'm going to put this clicker on that, so I don't lose it between Bible class and worship, because it always ends up somewhere in this auditorium. Okay, card number 19. Where was the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus? Anybody? Bethany. Bethany is actually a super important place in the Bible. Jesus did many important things here. Probably John chapter 11 is the most notable. Bethany was only about 2 miles outside of the city of Jerusalem. So put that in terms of us. If you were to walk out the parking lot and head towards town, you'd have to get about to the gas station by the high school. Is that called the Bowdon gas station? The one with the Bowdon B on it? What's that called? The Bowdon Mart, I guess, in the corner down there. Y'all live here. Y'all should know. Oh, y'all don't go on that side of town. Okay. All right, all you Randburg folks go past it, you know. That's about, to make the point, that's about 2 miles from here. Okay, that's all I was trying to do. So you see that on the map. Bethany's down here on the bottom right, and here is Jerusalem. Very close. This is where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived. A lot of things happen, especially what's alluded to here in our cards, that Lazarus was raised from the dead. Now, I'm told that the Jews believe that the spirit hovers over the body for 4 days. I've just read that in scholarly books and history books about the Jews. And so, there's a lot of allusions there to Lazarus being dead for 4 days before Jesus brought him back from the dead. Don't know how much significance that actually had in Jesus' particular journey, for him choosing to delay and not getting there until after Lazarus had died. But nonetheless, it is mentioned. And in John chapter 11, you'll remember it's mentioned that Jesus tells him to open the grave. And I think it's Martha that says in the King James, I always loved this when I was growing up, he stinketh, right? So they said, he's been in there long enough. Essentially, he's starting to decompose. He's dead, okay? And Jesus ignores that, tells Lazarus to come up out of the grave. I think it was Brother Marshall Keeble that said Jesus made sure that he said the name Lazarus, because if he would have just said, come out of the grave, the whole graveyard would have emptied, right? The power of Jesus to raise the dead is pretty significant. Of course, that happens here in John chapter 11. John 11:35, you probably all remember. This is a very important point in this passage. John chapter 11 and verse 35, the shortest verse in the Bible. When I was growing up, I grew up going to Maywood Christian Camp. And in our Bible classes, they always had us memorize like X number of verses per day. And the go-to verse, every one of us memorized first, was John 11:35, right? Jesus wept. That was a give me. We never memorized, though, Esther chapter 8 and verse 9, which is the longest verse in the Bible. We always did the shortest one, John 11:35. But it speaks to us in that particular text about Jesus' compassion. Now, there's been a lot of things, I think, in our Jesus course, when we did that a couple of quarters ago. We talked about this particular event, and I pointed out that, there's a lot of reasons why people think Jesus wept with the people. Some people believe that Jesus wept because the other people were weeping, that he felt compassion for them, with them. Makes sense. Could stand to reason, right? Other people think that Jesus was weeping because he knew that Lazarus was in a state beyond the grave and he was going to bring him back, which is one thing we kind of forget sometimes when we think that Jesus raised the dead, because the Bible tells us that after we die, we go somewhere. At least I like to think that. I like to think the Bible does teach that. I don't want to get to death and that not be true. Okay, we're all living our lives because after we take our last breath, something's happening after that. So what happened to Lazarus and the widow's son and Jairus' daughter, I don't know, but they were brought back from it, whatever it was. So some people think Jesus wept because of that, because he knew he was bringing Lazarus back from this state of being beyond the grave. I don't know, but he does bring him back, and he calls him up out of the grave. We're going to talk about a few more things on Sunday morning before we dive into the Passion Week. Specifically, we're going to talk about Jesus and the friendship he had with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. I think the friendship of Jesus with those three individuals speaks a lot to how you and I should be developing relationships. The importance of having relationships. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 1 says it's not good for people to be loners. In fact, Proverbs 18 and verse 1 says that if you isolate yourself, you're raging against all wisdom, which makes sense. God doesn't want us to isolate ourselves. He wants us to be interacting and with others, okay? I know there's times, like where we like to be by ourselves and kind of quiled away. Everybody needs that to some extent. It's still not good that man be alone, right? That was God's word from the garden. And so Jesus having these relationships kind of shows us a little bit of that. We'll talk about that Sunday morning. Any comments or questions?
Talk about this situation with Lazarus. I think it was Martha that said, if you had been here, he would not have died.
Yeah.
She blamed Jesus for it in a way. And there's another incident where a woman says, yeah, but even the dogs get the crumbs from the men from the table. Certain things that are said almost prompt Jesus to do something.
Yeah.
those miracles were like.
Yeah. There are times when he's impressed with the faith of individuals, you know. That a lot of people use that to say we have to have faith for God to do things for us, but of course that doesn't stand up to all the other miracles too, like the widow's son who didn't say anything, really doesn't seem, and yet he still performed the miracle. So yeah, there are a lot of instances. I think the one about the crumbs was the woman who touched the hem of his garment, I think. But yeah, there are a lot of instances where somebody says something and then Jesus, you know, performs this miracle, right? Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns? No? All right. You can give your grievances to Jerome on the way out. Thank y'all for your attention and comments tonight. Sorry, it was kind of like opening up a fire hose. I know we were going over a lot. But we are only on card 20, and we're almost 2/3 of the way through. So y'all know how it is when I teach.